The church bells rang slowly, their sound drifting through the air like whispers of old memories. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the crowd, his dark suit blending with the shadows near the doorway. No one expected him to be there, not on this day, not at this place. But he had come quietly, without announcement. Carrying something heavier than anyone could see inside, the guests filled the church with soft laughter and conversations. Flowers lined the aisle, their fragrance mixing with the music of a piano. At the front stood the bride, glowing in her white dress, holding the hand of the man she had chosen to marry. She was Keanu's ex-wife. Most people did not know their story. They only knew pieces to people who had loved once, who had shared dreams and then walked separate paths. But for Keanu, the story was not in pieces. It was whole, still carved into him, carried like a scar that never faded. As he stepped inside, a few guests turned, whispering. Some were surprised, some confused, some even disapproving. What was he doing here? Why would a man come to the wedding of the woman he had once loved so deeply? Keanu walked slowly down the aisle, his steps steady, his face calm but his eyes. Carrying a storm? He didn't look at the people staring. He only looked at her. She saw him then. Her eyes widened for just a moment, her smile faltering. The groom beside her glanced in confusion, but she gently squeezed his hand. Signaling him to stay calm, Keanu stopped a few steps away. He bowed his head slightly, not to the crowd, not to the groom, but to her, the woman who had once been his everything. The priest paused, sensing the tension. The room grew quiet, waiting. Keanu spoke softly, his voice steady, but filled with weight. I didn't come to disturb this day. I came to say goodbye. A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Goodbye, such a simple word, yet heavy enough to silence even the whispers, he continued. We had our time. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And it shaped who I am. I don't regret it. Today I see you stepping into a new life, and though my heart carries its own ache, it also carries respect. Her eyes shimmered with tears. She whispered his name, almost too softly for anyone else to hear. Keanu reached into his pocket, pulling out a small envelope. He placed it gently on the edge of the altar. This isn't for me, he said. It's for you. And when you open it, you'll understand why I came. The bride looked at the envelope with trembling hands, but didn't touch it yet. The priest cleared his throat, uncertain whether to continue. The groom shifted uneasily, though he tried to keep his composure. But the bride's gaze stayed on Keanu, caught between past and present. Keanu stepped back slowly, his voice softer now. I wish you happiness. I wish you peace. And I hope the love you find today lasts forever. With that, he turned and walked back toward the door. Every step echoed louder than the bells, louder than the murmurs. The guests watched in silence, their eyes shifting between him and the bride. She clutched the envelope tightly now, as if it were a lifeline, and though Keanu walked away, his presence filled the room, leaving everyone shaken. The church was silent. After Keanu walked out, as if the air itself was holding its breath, the bride stood frozen at the altar, her veil trembling softly as she held the small envelope Keanu had left behind. The groom's hand touched hers gently, but she could not look at him yet. Her eyes were fixed on the envelope, her heart racing. Guests shifted in their seats, whispers starting again. Some thought it was strange, others thought it was beautiful. But everyone felt the same question rising inside them: what had Keanu left behind? With trembling fingers, she slowly opened the envelope. Inside was a folded letter, written in Keanu's careful handwriting. Her eyes moved across the words, and almost instantly her lips parted in shock. She began to read quietly, her voice breaking after the first lines. I know today is not about me. It is about you. But I could not let this day pass without giving you something that words alone cannot hold. I came not to remind you of what we lost, but to thank you for what we had. You gave me love when I was lost. You gave me hope when I had none. And though we walked separate roads, you gave me memories that still keep me alive. Her tears fell onto the paper, smudging the ink. Her chest tightened as she continued reading. This is not a goodbye filled with sorrow. It is a goodbye filled with gratitude. I want you to carry no guilt, no doubt. I want you to walk into this new life knowing that somewhere, quietly, someone is still wishing you happiness every single day. The bride covered her mouth with her hand, trying to hold back sobs. The groom's face softened, confusion and sadness mixing as he watched her. But then, at the bottom of the letter, there was something more, something no one expected. Folded behind the note was a small photo. It was of the two of them, years ago, sitting on the floor of their old apartment, surrounded by books and empty pizza boxes, laughing like children. Written on the back in Keanu's handwriting were 5 simple words, "Thank you for my smile." Her body shook as she held it. The room around her blurred, the faces of the guests fading into the background. All she could see was Keanu's words. Keanu's heart still speaking, even though he was gone from the room. She whispered softly, almost to herself. He remembered everything. The groom, still silent, finally asked, "Do you want to stop?" She shook her head quickly, wiping her tears. "No, I can't stop. It's my choice, but..." She clutched the photo to her chest. "I will never forget what he gave me." The priest, unsure but moved by the moment, waited until she nodded, and the ceremony continued, though no one in the room was the same anymore. Every guest felt the weight of love that was once shared, the depth of letting go with respect. Outside, Keanu stood by the church gates, the wind tugging at his suit. He did not look back. He did not need to. He knew the letter would say what his voice could. Not yet. As he walked down the empty street, he felt his chest ache. He had given her freedom, but in giving it, he had also carved a wound deeper into himself. Still, there was a strange peace in him too, because love, he realized, was not about holding on it was about knowing when to let go. The wedding continued, but the mood inside the church had changed. The bride repeated her vows with her voice trembling, her hands still clutching the photo Keanu had left her. Every word she spoke to her new husband carried truth, but behind her eyes was a storm of memories, laughter, late nights, and the quiet love she once shared with Keanu. The guests felt it too. Some whispered to each other, wondering why Keanu had chosen to come. Others wiped tears from their own eyes, moved by the letter, even though they hadn't read it. It was as if his goodbye had reached every soul in the room. The groom stayed steady, though inside he wrestled with unspoken questions. He had always known about Keanu. He knew the history. He knew the love his wife once had. But seeing it come alive on their wedding day was something he had not prepared for. Still, he looked at her with patience, knowing her heart carried layers he would never erase. After the ceremony, as the couple walked back down the aisle, the bride held her bouquet in one hand and the folded photo in the other. She smiled for the crowd, but when her eyes fell on the empty doorway where Keanu had stood, her chest tightened. He was gone, but his presence lingered. Outside, under the fading sunlight, guests gathered for photographs and laughter, yet whispers of Keanu's visit floated between them. "Did you see his face?" one woman said. "He looked so calm, but his eyes carried pain. Why would he come at all?" another asked. "Would you go to your ex's wedding?" "Maybe that's love," someone else whispered. "Not the kind that holds on, but the kind that lets go with dignity." Meanwhile, Keanu walked alone down the quiet street, the sound of distant music fading behind him. Each step felt heavy, but he did not regret coming. He had given her his truth, and in doing so, he had given himself closure to her, so he tried to believe. But closure is not so simple. Later that night, while the wedding reception filled with laughter and dancing, the bride slipped away for a moment of silence. She found herself alone in a small side room, her veil laid aside, her hands shaking as she pulled out the photo again. Her tears fell onto the image of her younger self, laughing with Keanu. She whispered to the empty room, "Why does it still hurt?" At that moment, her maid of honor entered quietly, catching sight of the photo. Her eyes softened. "You loved him deeply, didn't you?" The bride nodded slowly. "Yes, but it wasn't enough. Our lives, they broke in different ways. I thought time would erase it. But seeing him today," she pressed the photo to her chest, "it reminded me that love never truly disappears, just changes shape." Her friend placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Then maybe what he gave you wasn't to hurt you. Maybe it was his way of giving you permission to. Keep both loves, the one you had and the one you have now. The bride wiped her tears, her heart caught between past and present. Back in the city, Keanu sat alone in his apartment. The lights were dim, and the silence pressed heavy. He pulled out a small box from a drawer, inside of which were old letters, photos, and small reminders of the life they once shared. He hadn't touched them in years. Tonight he opened the box and looked through them slowly, his heart aching with every memory. He stopped at a picture, her smile glowing, his arm around her shoulders. He closed his eyes, whispering softly, "Goodbye, my love." But as he placed the photo back into the box, he realized something important. Letting go of her did not mean letting go of love itself. It meant finding a way to give that love forward to others. In different forms, he leaned back in his chair, exhaling deeply, as if preparing for a journey he had not yet started. The days after the wedding passed slowly. But neither Keanu nor his ex-wife could escape the weight of what had happened. For Keanu, the quiet of his home felt heavier than ever. The letter he had written had left his hands, but the ache in his chest still remained. He walked through the city streets unnoticed, hidden behind sunglasses and a plain jacket, yet inside him there was no hiding. Everywhere he looked, memories echoed: the cafe they used to visit, the bookstore where they had spent hours, the little park bench where she once fell asleep on his shoulder. He had thought the letter would close the chapter. Instead, it had reminded him that some stories do not end. They only change form. But Keanu also knew he could not live in the shadow of what was lost. So he began to turn outward. He visited shelters quietly, offering donations without cameras. He spent time with strangers who carried heavy burdens, listening to them the way he once wished someone would listen to him. Every act of kindness gave his grief a place to rest, even if just for a moment. Meanwhile, his ex-wife began her new married life. From the outside, everything looked perfect. Her new husband was kind, patient, and steady. Their home was filled with laughter from friends and the warmth of fresh beginnings. Yet at night, when the house grew quiet, she often found herself reaching for the small photo Keanu had left behind. She would sit by the window, holding it close, her tears falling silently. Her new husband noticed the sadness in her eyes sometimes, though she tried to hide it. One evening he asked gently, "Are you happy?" She looked at him startled and nodded quickly. "Yes, I am." And she meant it in her own way. But deep inside, there was a part of her that still carried Keanu, a part that could never be erased. Whispers of Keanu's letter spread through the wedding guests. Some who had seen it told others, and soon it became more than just a memory. People began to talk about the way he had spoken, the dignity in his goodbye, and the way he had chosen respect over bitterness. "It made me cry," one guest said. "It was the purest love I've ever seen," another admitted. "Not many men could let go like that," someone whispered. And so, without intending to, Keanu's act of goodbye began inspiring others, reminding them that love was not always about possession, but about respect, humility, and kindness. One evening, as Keanu walked out of a small diner, he noticed a man and a woman arguing by the street. The woman's face was filled with pain, her voice breaking. Keanu didn't interfere, but as he passed, the man suddenly stopped shouting. He looked at Keanu, recognition in his eyes, and whispered to himself. He let her go with dignity. "And I can too." Keanu continued walking, unaware of how far his letter's echo had traveled. Back at her home, the bride-now wife sat quietly with her husband. She finally told him everything about the letter, about the photo, about how Keanu's words had shaken her. Her husband listened silently, then held her hand. "You don't have to erase your past to love me," he said gently. "He gave you memories, I give you today. Maybe we can carry both." Her heart softened, and for the first time since the wedding, she felt peace. And yet both she and Keanu still felt connected by an invisible thread, stretched but unbroken. The weeks turned into months, but the echo of that wedding day still followed both Keanu and his ex-wife like a shadow. For Keanu, the silence of his apartment became unbearable at times. He often found himself staring at the box of old memories letters, photos, and small keepsakes from their life together. Sometimes he would open it, other times he would force himself to leave it untouched. Every moment was a battle between holding on and letting go. One night, unable to sleep, he walked through the city streets under the glow of streetlights. As he passed an alley, he noticed a young man sitting on the cold pavement, his head in. His hands? The boy looked no older than 19, his clothes worn, his face tired from battles life had forced on him too early. Keanu hesitated, but then sat down beside him. The boy looked up in surprise. "Why are you here?" the boy asked, sharply. "You don't belong in places like this." Keanu gave a faint smile. "Maybe I don't, but maybe tonight I needed to." The boy scoffed. "You don't know what it's like to lose everything?" Keanu's eyes softened. "I do. Maybe not the same way as you. But I know what it's like to carry grief so heavy that it follows you everywhere. I know what it's like to love and lose, and still wake up the next day not knowing how to breathe." The boy stared at him, startled by the honesty. Keanu continued, his voice calm but strong. "But I also know this: you are not alone. And even in the worst darkness, kindness can be the first light." They talked for hours, and before dawn, Keanu helped him find shelter and a warm meal. Didn't give his name, he didn't seek recognition. But the boy later told others, and soon whispers spread about Keanu's quiet act of compassion. Meanwhile, his ex-wife also wrestled with her own battles. Married life was steady, her husband kind, but the memory of Keanu's letter still lived in her heart. Sometimes she would look at the photo he left and cry quietly, not because she regretted her choice, but because she finally understood the depth of his love, the kind that chose respect over possession. At a family dinner one evening, her mother leaned closer and whispered, "I heard about what Keanu did at your wedding. I've never seen such humility. You chose well with your new husband, but I think you also chose well with your past. Not everyone gets to be loved like that." The words struck her deeply. She realized that while her past with Keanu had ended, it was also a gift she could carry with her forever. Back in the city, Keanu kept giving, quietly donating books to schools, paying hospital bills for strangers, sitting with people in pain who needed someone to listen. The pain of his goodbye did not vanish, but he had begun to shape it into something larger than himself. Yet one evening at a charity event he attended quietly, something unexpected happened. As he walked through the hall, he saw his ex-wife standing at the other side of the room. Her eyes met his, and for a moment the noise of the crowd faded. She walked over slowly, her husband beside her. The air was heavy, filled with memories and silence. Finally, she spoke softly. "Thank you for the letter, for the photo, for everything. You didn't just give me closure, you gave me the strength to start again." Her husband nodded respectfully. "You gave her dignity. I will always be grateful for that." Keanu's eyes shimmered, but his voice stayed steady. "You don't need to thank me. Love isn't about holding on. Sometimes it's about giving the other person wings, even if you're not the one they fly to." The three of them stood quietly for a moment, and though nothing more was said, something unspoken passed between them, an understanding deeper than words. Months passed, and life slowly carried both Keanu and his ex-wife into new chapters. She settled into her marriage with a husband who treated her with gentleness, while still carrying the quiet gift Keanu had left her: the photo, the letter, and the reminder that real love does not vanish. It simply reshapes itself. For Keanu, the ache remained, but it had softened. It no longer chained him to the past. Instead, it pushed him to live with more purpose. He spent his days quietly helping those who had no one, sitting with the sick, funding schools, visiting shelters. He never spoke about it, never sought attention, but word of his kindness began to spread through whispers. People started calling him not just an actor, but a man who carried dignity even in his pain. Still, there were nights when he sat alone, staring at the box of memories. One evening, after a long day at a hospital where he had comforted children with no families, he opened the box again. He picked up the photo of himself and his ex-wife, the one he had almost given her, but chose to keep. He held it for a long time, then finally placed it back in the box and closed the lid. "Thank you," he whispered softly, "for everything." That night, instead of leaving the box hidden in his drawer, he carried it outside. He walked to a quiet park and buried it beneath an old tree. As the earth covered the box, he felt a strange release, as if he had finally laid his grief to rest. The next day, he returned to the community center where children gathered. One little girl ran up to him, handing him a drawing of a man standing beneath a tree with the sun shining behind him. "This is you," she said proudly. "You make people feel safe." Keanu's throat tightened. He crouched down and hugged her gently, realizing that in letting go of one chapter, he had begun another, one filled not with loss, but with giving. Meanwhile, his ex-wife also found her own peace. On her anniversary, she placed the photo Keanu had given her into a small frame. She kept it not as a reminder of sadness, but as proof that she had once been loved with such purity that it gave her strength for the rest of her life. She whispered softly to the frame, "Thank you, Keanu. I will always carry your kindness." Their lives no longer crossed paths, but they were forever connected by something greater than time-love, transformed into respect, to humility, into lessons that touched everyone who saw how they had parted. And so, the story that began with pain ended with peace. Keanu had said goodbye, but in his goodbye, he had left behind something stronger than presence. He had left behind dignity, hope, and a lesson that made everyone cry.